This is an introduction to Google Earth Pro. Now, Google Earth Pro is a little bit like Google Maps, um, but Google Earth Pro, when you download it initially, there are some things that are inside that come with the download. So, for example, you can put in borders and labels, roads and transportation, places, etc. And as you zoom in, it will populate your image with all of the information around. Now, while this does come with Google Earth Pro, one of the things that comes with Google Earth Pro that you don't get with Maps is these icons up at the top. This is to add pins and to draw lines. So, for example, I could take us in here. We can go to Dundee, and we can zoom in completely into, usually quite, almost down to within a metre of where we want to be. So here I can take a pin. Here we go. Now, there is a limited number of different types of pins that you can use. You can download other styles of pin if you wish. However, if I save my map and email it to you and you do not have these extra downloaded pins, then it will appear on your map as a white box with a red cross. So for that reason, although it limits me, I tend to use just the pins that come with Google Earth Pro. So therefore, I can put it in and I can say my house, and I can save it. And it saves it into the area in the top box as part of my places. There, my house. Now, one of the other things you can use in here is you can actually draw lines. Now, I can sit down and say, well, if you're coming in from the main Kingsway, you come in here, to here, turn, and that's my house. Now, once again, there is a limited number of lines you can use. You're restricted to those colours, and you're restricted to the thickness of line. I mean, I can put it up to 2 here, and you can see the thickness of the line. Here we go. And then we see the pin and the line. Now, on this map here, this is there are other options you can put in. You can make polygons. Basically, you can draw areas around irregular objects and such like. There are a few others. There's a map, and you can tell you the distance, blah blah blah. That's 0.2 miles, etc. But for all intents and purposes, everything on the map I'm about to show you is in fact just either a line or a pin. So I'll delete them. Now, so the next thing I'm going to show you is what I've added onto this map. And to do that, I'm going to zoom back out, and I'm going to clear everything. So literally all we have here at the moment is a satellite image of Scotland. Next things first. First thing I'm going to put in are these. Now these yellow lines, they actually represent the rivers of Scotland. So this is the River Ness, it comes down into Loch Ness, etc. This one here is the River Spey. This one here is the Devon, the Don, the Dee, the Tay, and of course the River Forth. Now the next thing I'm going to show you about these yellow lines is just how accurate they actually are. So once again, you can zoom right in, and you can see that this yellow line, which represents the River Devon, this is Banff over here, this is Macduff on this side, but the line itself is very accurate. It's to within a metre, and it literally follows the meridian point between the two river banks. Now this is very useful, especially when you're looking at older maps. For example, this is Ptolemy's map, And as you can see, it appears to have been turned at 90 degrees towards the east. There's some theories about why this is, including the fact that beyond a certain point of here, the Romans believed that you couldn't live any further north than that. Although, regardless of the reason why the map has been distorted, it has been distorted. And when you look at these things on a map, it's a lot easier sometimes to actually just place them on the map, on a real map. And there we can visualise them. And we can see the areas. So there we can see the River Loxa, and the River Kylus, which is the Spey and the Deveren, and also the River Isla, which is Helmsdale, Tarvedum Promontory, the River Nabari, and all of the other names that appear on Ptolemy's map. It isn't complete, because obviously my map's not complete, but I have added in a couple of others, one the Metai and the Caledonians, which are also mentioned by other Roman writers of a similar period. But to return to the streams and rivers again, there are other maps which can also be problematic. For example, this one here of Pont's map. Now this is Dundee, or Dundee, as it's now called, or Dundee if you're Dundonian, and all of the other place names and rivers that exist in and around this part of Angus. Now, this is Pont's map, and it dates from about 1580, and as such, it's not a map in the sense that we would recognise. So, for example, if Duntroon is further uphill from Malumbi, then it tends to be marked on this map as further away, simply because it would take longer to get there, because you're going to go uphill, which can make it quite complicated to actually follow. Now, if we come down, we can actually put in the place names that Pont has there, and also at the same time, as along with all the other major rivers, this map here also has all of the streams and rivers that exist inside this area. So if you wish, this is a proper geographical representation of Pont's map, and as you can see, it's a lot easier to follow this than it is to follow Pont's map. So there is a usefulness for this, and because once this is done, you can this is everything that is on Pont's map, so you no longer need to struggle over finding the location of all of these things, because these points are exact also to within the metre. Now, obviously, there are an awful lot of other data points on this map. I'm going to show you some. Now that's me highlighting everything that's on inside my places. This is well over 150,000 data points. And as you can see, once you put everything on this map, you can't see anything. You can't see the wood for the trees. And if you've got a rather slow or an older computer, clicking on that is likely to crash your computer. So obviously that slowed down my computer quite dramatically, so I paused it until such a time as it's been removed. Now, the same thing is true even if we focus on just one piece of archaeology. So for example, the Roman archaeology. Now, from this level, it is rather difficult to see what's actually happening here. It really only makes sense when you actually zoom in. However, if you want to look at the data from further out, you've got the ability to switch things on and off. Now, what I'm going to put on here first is the road markers. Now, you can see the road markers coming all the way from the Spey, down via Huntly, over the the River Don down to the Dee, and then further all the way down through Angus and the Mearns into Gowrie, etc., etc. This is the Gascoigne that you see down here. But what we can do is we can do this. These are the Roman roads. Now, just as a point, these data points for the Roman archaeology have come from the Canmore website. Now, the Canmore website, this is everything that is Roman at that, from the website. But when we look at some of these marks, they're actually coming. This is asserted by ministers in the statistical accounts. This data point, it's somewhere in this map, basically from an earlier account in the 1790s and 1820s. However, these ones here are not. These are, you can click on the links here. I'll click on and it should take us to it, and you can actually see what it's saying about this particular data point. It's telling you the exact direction, where the road was, what they found there. This is literally the archaeological result from a particular dig. So once we know the line of the archaeological evidence, we can then remove the Roman markers, and it simplifies the map quite dramatically. Just as a matter of interest, as you'll see here, this part of the road is in fact pink and not red. That is because we do have other pieces of archaeological evidence that would indicate that the road did stretch this far. It's just that they have not actually found any archaeological evidence as per the rest of the road. So it's only possible, and that's the terminology that's used in Canmore website, and whenever it says something is possible, then it's marked with a pink rather than red. There are other things that we can put onto the map. This is all of the coin spread that we found in Scotland, and although it's not exactly following the route of the road, it's there or thereabouts. There are some over in Skye, some further up in Ross and Cromarty, but this enables us to match up Roman finds versus, say, Roman roads, and I think we can see that there is a correlation there, no doubt. Also, one of the things we can put in the Roman forts. Once again, you can see this one here at Arditi. It's actually pink because it's only possible, as opposed to, say, this one at Fendoch, which is Roman. There's enough information there. I dare say we could take this map further and we could divide it into, say, Flavian and Agricolan time periods, but that's something that I haven't done, and perhaps something that somebody else would rather to do. But while we can see all of the Roman forts, we can see beyond Stonehaven there are no Roman forts. What we do have is temporary marching camps. Now, temporary marching camps are different from Roman forts, in as much as that they tend to be built when the legions are on campaign. The idea being is that if they had moved into, say, Eithin Wells and stayed there for a day, a week, couple of months, or a summer before leaving, then invariably what you will be left with is a temporary camp. Whereas if they set up in, say, Cairpoo or down in Edinburgh near Cramond, there are legions stationed there for maybe 10, 20, 30 years. And when the legionnaires are stationed in any place for that length of time, then a temporary marching camp will be invariably turned into a wooden fort, rather than, or perhaps even stone in other cases. So what this is indicating to us here and now is a summer campaign. Now, when we actually look, especially at Eithon Wells or Glenmalin, they're in the same place. We find there's a smaller temporary marching camp that's dated to about AD 85. And right on top of it is one of the largest temporary marching camps anywhere in the Roman world. Now, this tends to correspond with the history that we actually know about Severus's campaign in 207 AD into Scotland, where he arrived with 25,000 soldiers, and inside Glenmalin there are over 160 bread ovens. 25,000 soldiers actually accompanying the emperor himself. This is a major campaign. The only thing I would say is that these two camps are one on top of the other, in as much as they built one in AD 85, and then they came back 120 odd years later and they built another one directly on top of the old one. Now, I know this area quite well, but I couldn't find it without the use of a sat-nav. Now, I don't know if the Romans had maps, but they must have had some very detailed itineraries for them to be able to go back and find something they abandoned 120 years previously. Just one other aside, to have a look at this point here. This is the Roman ford. It's at Diliburis, not far from Bankery. Now, it's marked on modern day maps that this is a Roman fort. Now, as we've already said, all of the archaeology that we find further north in here is all temporary. It's not as if the people that lived round about this area, they were used to seeing for 20 or 40 years Roman legionnaires living in stone-built forts. This represents literally the passing of an army over the river in at the beginning of summer and then retreating at the end of the summer. The fact that 2,000 years later it's still called the Roman ford, it must have left a huge impression on the local populace so that it still retains its name even today. That's probably one of the most interesting data points on the map. We don't know how far Septimus Severus actually travelled in Scotland. However, and indeed an awful lot of the time the archaeology that we have from these areas is less than satisfactory. For example, here they consider that Wester Alves is perhaps a temporary camp, although at the moment it's still only a possibility. But that's a possibility simply by looking at crop marks. There haven't been any digs there as yet. But he says that he travelled to the north of Scotland and then he met with the local tribes leader. Now, it's interesting when we look at here is the location of Birkhead Fort, which is very close to Wester Alves. Now, we know Birkhead went on at a later date. From what we can see from the remains, it was one of the centres in the north of Scotland, one of the largest areas, perhaps the capital of the Fortriu, or the Verturions as they're called by Ptolemy. We don't know, but that's certainly something that with further work may possibly be clarified. Now, one of the things that this map enables you to do is, whereas at the moment this map is showing you basically the streams and Roman installations and Roman roads, etc., which is often what you'll see from historians and archaeologists. If they're interested in Roman, they will show inevitably just the Roman information on a map. However, if we look down at this point here, what we're looking at here is the road markers, and we can see this is Clachmannan around here, and this is Glendevin. I'll put in some roads and some place names so you can see where we are. This is Clachmannan, and as we zoom in, yep, we can see the Roman road in red. This part of the road here is in pink because we don't know how it matches up with this part here, which is most definitely red, Roman. But if we look here and zoom in, you should be able to see some of the place names there. Hold on a second. Places, roads, get rid of the roads. This is Glendevin and Glenshirrup. Now, obviously, this is known Roman road with archaeological proof. There's a piece of Roman road up here, but this area here I've marked in pink, simply because, well, you know, if there's a Roman road here and a Roman road there, and we're pretty certain there are, then they would have been joined as well, and I put this in just to complete the road. However, when I looked at this area around here, I actually went there with in my car, and I could see nothing of any great tactical or strategic value for the Romans to build a road into what appears to be nowhere. Now, they might have been bored and you know, they were looking for work for the soldiers, but even still, it's unlikely they would have actually built a road to nowhere. And from where this road is, I can see there are no points round about that would indicate a temporary camp, a tower, which would enable them to see over long distances. So for a year, I just left it as it was. But then I was reading a book called The Drove Roads of Scotland by a guy called Haldane. It was written in the late 1940s. And inside that there's a map, and the book is a detailed description of all the routes. And when I do that, we find that this is one of the biggest and most important drove roads in Scotland. You know, are the drovers reusing the remains of a Roman road, or are the Romans using what is an existing road already here when they arrived? You know, I think the map poses the question, but I don't think the archaeology has been done yet to prove either way. So if we zoom back out again, we can see the drove roads of Scotland. Now, drove roads are not the same as military roads. I'm just going to put in the roads for the moment, and I'm going to remove some of the other information there. Drove roads are for the movement of cattle, invariably, and they tend to go up steep the sides of steep ridges, through passes called ballachs, and down the other side and cross lochs, which invariably are running from southwest to northeast. This is due to the nature of the land in Scotland being shaped by the glaciers. However, when it comes to actually putting in military roads, if we remove the drove roads and then we put in the military roads, here we go. Military roads are different from drove roads in as much as that it's unlikely that they will try to put a road up a very steep-sided ridge and through a ballach and down the other side. To do that would require you to put in an awful lot of hairpins. It's a much bigger engineering project. The reason they would need to put in hairpins is because a military road, by definition, you're going to need to be able to move horse and cart around, which is not the case for drove roads. However, for military roads. However, when these people were putting in these military roads, they were acutely aware of all of the Roman stuff that was round about. Indeed, some of the earliest stuff that we've actually got concerning these, some of the earliest information we have concerning the Roman roads and Roman fortifications actually comes from the people who were responsible for not only mapping but building the military roads in the 1700s. Indeed, they knew exactly what they were doing, and for all intensive purposes, they were completing what the Romans had failed to do. And they were aware of that. They knew that. Um, Roy, the father of the Ordnance Survey, some of his drawings of the early Roman fortifications, especially at places like Stregaeth and Ardoch and Camelon, are absolutely detailed, and he understood exactly what the Romans had done, and was in, they were in the process of doing exactly the same. Other archaeology, which is perhaps worth looking at, is, for example, the distribution of souterrains. Now, obviously, as I've said, this doesn't include all of the work I've done up here as yet, but it does cover this area. Souterrains are a certain terrestrial type hole in the ground, although the term that's used in Canmore, I think there are two separate types of souterrain. There are some which are much older. They're almost like chambered cairns, which go by the name of souterrain in Canmore. But there are also others which appear to be more modern, i.e. from 200 AD to 200 BC to 200 AD. And, comparing them to where the Roman remains are, there is a correlation, undoubtedly, that we can see. So, one of the other things on this map, which is of great use, but is perhaps one of the largest time-consuming things to do, is all of the smaller streams and rivers in Scotland. This is all of the streams that we find inside Scotland. You can see the extent of my map so far. I'm presently working up in Buchan and Mar. But if we actually zoom in on these, I've just had to switch off an awful lot of the rivers there, because obviously with that much information actually showing at the same time, it slows down the computer quite dramatically. Now, as you can see, these are all of the streams and burns and such like that are inside Fife at the moment. But if we zoom in on these, we can see that they are as detailed and as accurate as the yellow ones I showed you, the major rivers earlier on. And this is important for when we start to plot on this map archaeology. So, for example, if we choose to post up forts, now we can see all of the forts, but invariably these forts they occur one in each region, which is hardly surprising. I mean, it may attest to the age of these, how long these boundaries have been in existence, but in a time where people can't read and write, then it would make sense to use visual markers like, say, streams and boundaries to define people's territories. So I don't think there should be any great shock there. Just as a matter of interest, white duns are recognised archaeological forts, duns, keirs sometimes, raths as well. Blue duns are places which have names inside them which would indicate that, Dunmore or Dunbeg, and there's no archaeology there. However, the name suggests that there was a fortification of some description there. A good example of that is Dunbog here. I mean, then we have green duns. Green duns are put in, there's not many of them in Fife, but they're the vitrified forts. Crannogs, moated sites, Mots and Baileys. These are the Mots and Baileys. You see them, and there is one green broch at Drumcarroll in Fife. Now, one of the things I started off doing this map was actually meant to be a name place study. So I started off by putting in place names. And as an afterthought, I decided to go and actually look for, and which isn't a bad idea, because on this Glasgow University website, they have actually published this. So I've typed in the name, any name from Fife. This one is Abercrombie, and it takes you to a list. And what you can actually see here is that they have put in from every single document, or the oldest documents they can, the spelling, and where this is from, right the way through from the earliest time. In this case, the earliest mention is 1247, right the way down to how it appears on the various different maps. So we can see Blau's map, right the way down to 1855. It's then followed by a blurb with a possible explanation of what the place name means. It's a brilliant site. My only criticism of it is that it only covers Fife. This should really be stretched to include the whole of Scotland. However, once it started off on the place names, I realised as an afterthought I went to a place called Canmore. And on Canmore, this is the Canmore website, this is all of the archaeology as a database plotted on a map that they have from Scotland. Now, this includes all of the data they've had from, right back from the beginning of their records. So yeah, this dates right the way back to the 1800s, and indeed all of the Roman points that you can see on my map, they come from here. And when I transferred them into my map, you can download KLM and KMZ files from the Canmore database, and you can import them into Google Earth Pro just by simply opening them, and they will come in. But as you can see, the numbers of data, of data points from Canmore, it covers about 90% of all of the place names here. Then follows, you have to go through a map and see what isn't there, and then add them in. But once that's done, as I said, it does give you the ability to compare. So you can have a look at, say, for example, castles, and you find invariably in each of these regions there's one castle, and inside each of these regions as well there's going to be one parish church, except where there are religious centres like Balmerino and Lindores. But once the database is done, I'll give you an example. As I said, these categories that I'm using, farms, cairns, field, settlement and such like, these are the terms that are used by Canmore. So to a large extent I'm trying to keep them the same as Canmore, but it's not always possible. But once you've done that, you can then go through all of these different place names, and you can do this. You can pull them out, and then you can go and look at let me just remove this. You can then start to plot place name distribution sites. So this one is for pit names. Bear in mind that I've not completed Buchan and I haven't started Mar yet, and obviously I haven't done this area there, but you can start to see the distribution of place names. There's Aber, Cumber, that's all three of them, but obviously they are decided, I can switch them off, Invers, Abers, which is useful. So the actual, once again, it is also a question of it's a question that once the database is started, it can be added to. As I said, so far there's up to 150,000 data points, and I've only finished half the north of Scotland, so there's still quite a long way to go. Hopefully you find this of interest.